Welcome to Kaiser Watch with John Kaiser. I'm your host, Jim Goddard.
John, welcome back to the show. What's coming up today?
Well, Jim, today we're going to talk about a positive development involving Canada's future as a place where companies make batteries, and also a somewhat negative development that tanked one of our favorites today.
How important is the MOU announced last Friday between FPX Nickel, JOGMEC, and Prime Energy and Planet Solutions?
Well, FPX Nickel was halted on Thursday, September 21st, and didn't give a reason, and we were all scratching our heads. But it turns out that on that day, Japan's Industry Minister Yasutoshi Nishimura had showed up in Ottawa to sign what they call a Memorandum of Cooperation about together establishing sustainable and reliable global battery supply chains. Big, long paragraph, but this was really important because what it means is that Japan has promised to build downstream battery manufacturing capacity in Canada, provided Canada allows the necessary critical minerals to be mined and supplied to these Japanese manufacturing facilities, which will provide quality jobs in Canada and ultimately ship the battery materials or batteries into the United States, where Toyota has existing factories that make cars. Now, FPX Nickel resumed on Friday and had a very positive response because it put out its own announcement of this non-binding memorandum of understanding, which creates a framework between FPX Nickel, JOGMEC, and Prime Energy and Planet Solutions to figure out how Dakar can end up supplying a battery factory built by this JV in Canada. Now, interesting is that the JV is a joint venture between Toyota and Panasonic. And on September 8th, I had written about talked about in a Kaiser Watch episode about a pre-feasibility study that FPX Nickel had finally published for the Dakar project. And one of the things that I have observed about it was the initial stage capacity would produce about 47,000 tons of nickel per year. And this year, Outokumpu, who is the Finnish stainless steel producer, which specializes in selling clean stainless steel to those markets that care about such things, it took a 9.9% strategic stake in FPX Nickel for $16 million, but it also got an offtake right which amounts to about 7,500 tons of nickel per annum. Now, that's interesting because that PFS also included the numbers for a nickel sulfate refinery, which would not be located on the Dakar site, but would be located somewhere closer to urban centers, and it would produce 40,000 tons of nickel sulfate, or 40,000 tons of contained nickel in nickel sulfate for the battery market. Now, the refinery extra cost, the rate of return on that was not very good. So it made no sense that any big mining company like Vale, which might have acquired FPX Nickel, would ever bother to build this. But last year, the company raised $12 million from another strategic investor. This one's the mystery investor, also 9.9%, and they chipped in some additional money when Outokumpu arrived on the scene. And we've all been scratching our head who it is. From the way Martin Turenne, the CEO of FPX Nickel, has talked about it, it's clear this wasn't a traditional mining company. And it was also clear that it wasn't some sort of financial entity, a hedge fund or some high net worth investor or something. That it looked like somebody who was interested in the strategic potential of the Dakar nickel output, which will be in the form of a ferro-nickel concentrate. Its primary market is for the stainless steel market, but it will have a very low carbon footprint and not at all dirty, like the Indonesian nickel that feeds the Chinese nickel sulfate battery markets. So I started to speculate that the mystery investor was probably Japanese, because FPX Nickel had also formed an alliance with JOGMEC, which is sort of a government agency that seeks out future mineral resources, often doing joint ventures with juniors, and eventually when they find something, auctions it off to one of the big Japanese conglomerates who might need that feedstock for whatever it is that they produce. And Martin had also kind of like led us to believe that the strategic inventor was somewhere in the battery supply chain. One could think of a car maker, one could think of a chemical precursor maker, or even a battery maker. And the chemical precursor makers, they're all obscure. They wouldn't care about the secrecy. Panasonic, I didn't think would also care about the secrecy. But Toyota, that kind of made sense, because Toyota has been the laggard in EV deployment. It has stuck to building the hybrids, did not like the battery configurations that were available, and was going to leapfrog batteries by doing a lot of research into hydrogen fuel cell technology, but that seems to have slipped well into the 2030s. And in June, they made a blockbuster announcement claiming that they had figured out how to make a solid-state lithium-ion battery that was safe. And now they were going to build a car by 2027, a high-end car that had 1,200 kilometers range on a 10-minute charge. And that's like a Tesla killer combination. And then they revealed that it was actually a manufacturing breakthrough. It wasn't like they invented a new configuration. It was that they had solved the extremely high cost of making an existing configuration. And once you get into manufacturing as the key cost center, then down the road, you will be able to get even greater efficiencies out of it, be able to make the product cheaper and cheaper. The inputs stay the same price, but the processing cost collapses. And that's what's happened with solar panels. And this gave me the idea, oh wow, by 2030, they are going to leapfrog Tesla and all these others and launch the Camry and the Corolla, the most popular affordable cars ever, as EVs using this new battery. So Toyota became my suspect number one, especially when I learned later that this particular solid-state battery requires an awful lot of nickel in the cathode. But speculation about the mystery investor is now irrelevant, because this company, because this joint venture makes it very clear that Toyota and Panasonic want to build a factory in Canada and help get the car built. And this, of course, is what Canada needs. And it's also a big development, because in August 11th, FPX Nickel stock was blindsided by the announcement by the Klatsin Nation that after 10 years of pocketing reconciliation payments from FPX Nickel to allow them to explore in their backyard, this First Nation group that has made tons of money from clear-cut logging its traditional territory discovered that this territory is sacred and they will not tolerate an open pit mine in their territory. And I soon figured out that this sudden change of mind came because the Klatsin band had in 2019 split into the Binchi Wutan band, with whom FPX Nickel had also done an MOU of understanding. But this group seems to have a stronger traditional claim to the area where the Dakar project is located, and has continued to be supportive of this idea of, it would be a good thing to have a clean nickel mine in our backyard, which strengthens our local economy and also helps with the energy transition of the world, which benefits everybody. And there's a lot of controversy emerging now about this whole question of First Nations and their relationship to the 95% of the population of Canada who do not have Indigenous DNA. Monday is Truth and Reconciliation Day, where government workers get the day off so that they can do penance for sins that they did not themselves actually commit. And on Tuesday this week, there was a shocking ruling from the BC Supreme Court, which ruled that the BC mineral claim system was not proper because it did not allow the First Nations to, or require the First Nations to be consulted before the title is granted. And the way the staking system works in British Columbia now and in most provinces, when Crown land becomes open for staking, there is an online rush to claim the land. You submit your application, and if you're first and your credit card clears for the payment, you get title right away. And there's two types of claim stakers. There are the actual geological groups, the prospectors, the companies, who spend a lot of time generating ideas as to why a particular area might be interesting and host a significant deposit. Historically, it's been copper and gold. Copper, of course, qualifies as a critical mineral, but these days the interest is also in the whole class of critical minerals. And the key to this is there is IP created in generating idea. If it's already owned by somebody who hasn't done anything because of assessment claim, not doing assessment work, the claims will lapse and come open. This group wants to be able to go in there and try and get it. Groups like Eagle Plains have become quite efficient at setting up computer algorithms to, when that stroke of midnight hits, boom, they pound the system, get in there faster than somebody in front of a computer in their armchair trying to see if they can stake some claims with their credit cards and flip them to an actual exploration company. But in cases where the land is open and you do your grunt work either through archival research or even walk the ground with boots and with your hammer and hit the rocks and map and say, this area conceptually is very interesting, you can just go in there and stake it, and then you can work it and hopefully find a deposit that could be turned into a mine. And what the ruling has said is that BC has 18 months in which it needs to revise the system so that consultation to all the affected groups happens before title is granted. And existing claims are not affected, but now there is going to be a staking rush underway to pretty much tie up everything that's worth looking at over the next 18 months. The new system, which the various First Nations groups clearly interpret as saying you can't grant mineral title until we have been consulted. And because multiple groups claim overlapping traditional territory, multiple groups all have to be consulted, even though formally they have no jurisdiction over this area. So in 18 months, BC will be required to have a third world type concession system where, yes, it's first come, first serve. You put in your application for some big land position, and sometimes it takes years to get approval from the various government agencies. In the third world countries, the approval usually comes about by figuring out who within the system needs to be incentivized to nudge whoever makes the final decision to grant the concession application. And if the proper incentive is not paid, then, well, you just never get it granted, and eventually it expires. Under the new system, there will have to be an expiry period for approval during which you have to consult all these groups. And every First Nation now will look at some junior company that's applying for this and sort of say, we're either not going to bother consulting with you, and that's your fault because, it's your job to consult with us, but, we're busy with other things. So tough luck for you. Time clock runs out. Then what will happen is they can go in there and apply for the same concession. And guess whom they have to consult? Oh, ourselves. And when there's competing, overlapping things, then it becomes difficult because the other group, let's say the Binchi Wutan, if the Platson have applied for this and consulted them, says, yeah, we don't have a problem here. The Binchi Wutan might have a problem and object. How the Canadian government is going to solve this is beyond me. But this requirement, with its hopeless situation, is a gift to the anti-mining lobby in Canada, because it basically, down the road, sterilizes the whole process, the whole entrepreneurial venture capital-based process for identifying prospective ground, getting secure title to it, putting the work into the ground to see if anything is there, and then going through a quite rigorous permitting project to see if the mine can be developed without wrecking the environment in harmful ways. So this is the kind of mood that's out there in the name of truth and reconciliation. Bad things were done to the First Nations peoples in the past couple hundred years in the name of say Christianity, and denying and basically committing cultural genocide on these people, taking the kids from their families and putting them into little indoctrination centers. But that's ended decades ago. And now we have this attitude that somehow all Canadians must pay for this. And because First Nations communities are scattered through all of Canada, whereas the non-Indigenous are concentrated in urban and suburban centers, there's this sense emerging that Canada is a giant park under the special sovereignty of the First Nations, and they have the final say on whether anything gets mined. So this deal between Japan and Canada, it puts Prime Minister Justin Trudeau in a tough spot, because his priority has been to cater to the First Nation wishes, and now he's got this deal in place where we're going to build these battery factories that are going to generate lots of jobs, generate GDP, which will help you make reconciliation payments to these groups in the area. There'll even probably be some revenue splitting thing. And you're suddenly going to let some local groups say, no can do. We don't want this to happen in our backyard, just because we can say no. So Trudeau has been set up to have to change his tune on that. The BC ruling will start a conversation about what this is really all about, and the future of Canada as a critical minerals supplier. That's going to become much more prominent, and young people are going to have to think harder about their attitude towards mining. This idea that there should be no mining in Canada because it's dirty and ugly. I ask these people, hold up your iPhone. Do you know that there's blood inside? Do you know that there's tantalum capacitors in there that make it work? These iPhones are made in China. Where does the tantalum come from? Some comes from in fact, most comes from responsible mines in places like Brazil, but some of it comes from coltan, which comes from the Kivu region of Congo, where the warlords enslaved the local people, have even children at gunpoint work the rivers and the seams nearby for the coltan. The Chinese traders show up. They buy it from the warlords. They use the money to buy weapons so that they can fight each other for whatever reason. And then the Chinese traders ship it to the Chinese refineries, which are all dirty, polluting, and the downstream victims have no say in all the fumes and garbage that gets dumped into their backyard. And into this pot gets melted the legitimate tantalum and this dirty tantalum, and they tell Apple, we're only shipping you the clean stuff, but you don't know. Your iPhone has blood in it, and insofar as that you oppose mining in jurisdictions where it gets done responsibility, where all the downstream potential victims get figured out in advance and mitigation measures are taken, when you oppose that out of principle, while at the same time refusing to acknowledge that you're supporting blood these other places, I have no respect for that attitude. So I think all of this is going to come to a big head, and this deal between Japan and Canada, and also at the FPX Nickel level, I think this is going to be a watershed in terms of elevating this conversation to the level of, okay, we really need to think this through properly and fairly and make it a win-win for everybody.
Why has Verde Agritech stock plunged?
Today was a terrible day, though. In the past week, the stock has been dropping. Today, Verde Agritech put out a news release that the CEO, Chris Veloso, has started a program where he is basically going to, over the next 3 years, automatically sell half of his 9.8 million or so share position. And this has happened before. In December, he had sold over 500,000 shares. Later, there was bad news about what was happening to K Forte sales. In April, we saw one of the directors, Renato Gomez, unload more than half of his position, 320,000 shares, because he had margined the stock to raise money for who knows what. And when the stock price went down, the broker pulled the plug and blew it all out. But on top of putting out this news that he's got this selling program going, we see on SETI file today that he sold 180,000 shares on June 26 and June 27. Now, back in the last time I talked about Verde Agritech was when they had put out their second quarter financial results. And we could kind of tell that this was going to be a bad year. And I even questioned that they would meet the guidance that they had for volume sales this year. Revenue sales definitely going to be down because potash is not $1,000 a ton. Or it's down at 320 or so. And the problem the company had encountered was that the farmers who had borrowed money to buy their fertilizer inputs in 2021 and 2022, and by the time they got to sell the crops, because of the high interest rates and the slowing of the global economy, had pushed crop prices down. So they were financially squeezed, and they were having trouble getting the credit for buying the fertilizers for this year. And because Verde Agritech is just a small company trying to displace the established KCL importers, it was on the losing end of this situation because it cannot extend the credit the way the big importers can. So they are having a rough year. Everybody is bracing for bad things to happen. They created a breath of fresh air not too long ago by talking about how they might be able to sell carbon credits because the glauconite ground up, it dissolves, when it dissolves, it creates bicarbonate, which absorbs carbon dioxide in the soil, and eventually this combines with other minerals to create a permanent type of mineral, such as limestone, which isn't going to release carbon dioxide for a very, very long time. And the possibility they could sell carbon credits for each ton of K Forte applied to a field would allow them to discount their product by a meaningful amount so that the Brazilian farmer who couldn't give a rat's ass about the climate change or anything like that, for whom money talks, well, if I can get this cheaper than KCL, by a meaningful amount, or those other guys, which the other guys can't meet, well, then I'm going to buy K Forte. So this could be the key to penetrating the market. But Chris Veloso never really disclosed any concrete details about how this carbon sequestration is supposed to happen. You look up on their website and they talk about the water with the bicarbonate ions and it flows out to sea and eventually combines with magnesium or calcite and sinks to the bottom of the ocean. You say, well, how do you prove that? And the company has been negligent in truly explaining how this is going to happen. And so the stock has started to fade in response to this. But when the CEO suddenly starts selling stock, a couple of days and then before he's already started selling, and then he puts out this thing that I'm going to be selling. The market is nervous, and I don't know what's going to happen over the next week. But Chris Veloso has his job cut out. He needs to come out on the stage. He needs to explain what is going on, why he is selling even before he announces that he's got a formal program in place. He needs to reassure the market that the financial situation is not going to bankrupt the company, and he also needs to broaden the management base. This has been a one-man show for too long. He can't do everything. He's running around the world trying to entice a strategic investor, trying to attend conferences, trying to keep all this stuff going. This company, it had $100 million or so revenue last year. This is no longer a little Mickey Mouse startup. This is a serious company. The management structure needs to be beefed up, and he needs to get off this idea that he can't have any serious investors. This is a company which is basically, he owns 20% of it, and the rest is owned by retail. That is unstable. Retail is upset. Retail is fickle. Retail is looking at everything going wrong in the world and thinking, why do I own this? Retail can't backstop a declining company like this. He needs to get somebody like BlackRock in there who understands the big ESG picture, who became a cornerstone investor in Sigma Lithium below $10, and that's now a $50 stock and in production, and now dealing with hopefully serious offers to take out the company and create absolute liquidity for all the Sigma Lithium shells. Verde Agritech needs a cornerstone shareholder that has the strength that when something goes wrong, they can step in. But right now the stock is in a sort of free fall because the main shareholder seems to suddenly have a need to sell stock, and it's kind of coincidence that it's half of his position, and he is married, so all the tongues start wagging. Are we seeing a dissolving relationship? And since he's the key person in this, the spouse is going to be liquidating the half that is hers. Crystal also has a lot of work to reassure the market. Apparently, the farm situation is turning around in Brazil. The potash and phosphate prices, nitrogen prices have all come down substantially. The crop prices have recovered, and maybe he can get things going again. But we are now in a scary period where we don't know, and him launching the selling program has really unnerved the market. He needs to turn this around by telling us what's going on and bringing in additional muscle so that this company, which is now starting to encounter knives from the KCL importers, because when they saw how quickly K-Forte started to sell when there were suddenly supply curtailments, they now are taking seriously his talk about eventually producing 50 million tons a year, and they did get approval to at least start applying for how to permit the rail spurs to deliver this product to these farther regions. And perhaps he even needs to start looking at finding a serious buyer for the company, maybe even the strategic investors, somebody like a Nutrien, which has to compete with Russia and Belarusian potash exports to Brazil. Maybe Nutrien should become a strategic shareholder in Verde Agritech. So some things are going to have to change over the next while to make sure that this extraordinary potential that this company has doesn't get snuffed up in some sort of a financial train wreck that allows somebody else to step in and pick everything up on pennies on the dollar.
John, thank you so much for the update.
You're welcome, Jim.
I'm Jim Goddard.
Comments made on Kaiser Watch are an expression of opinion only and should not be construed in any manner whatsoever as a recommendation to buy or sell any financial instrument at any time. Archived online at kaiserresearch.com.